Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing The Ghosts of Pripyat by Steve Rothery.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Yeah, Steve Rothery from Marillion, you know him, you know who he is. This is his solo album and it's actually quite good, so here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So Steve Rothery from Marillion has finally released an album after 30 years since he has risen to popularity with Marillion. I'm saying it like it came out now, but no, it came out in 2014 and it's actually quite good, and I'm really happy that it didn't rush making a solo album, his first debut album, because honestly I think that if it would have rushed it in the past it might have not been as good as this one, because this one is definitely something worth a listen. And today we're looking at The Ghosts of Pripyat. Now, this name sounded kind of random to me. I didn't know what Pripyat means. I think that's how it's said, by the way. I'm not entirely sure. But I went ahead and researched and I found out something that if you might not know, don't feel ashamed. But Pripyat was one of the towns in Ukraine that was heavily affected by the Chernobyl incident of 1968. And if you don't know what that incident is, basically in 1968, one of the nuclear reactors in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant basically melted, had like an inner melting, and that made it so there was an eruption of radioactive radiation to the entire vicinity, and it reached a lot of places in the world, and it was very much destructive. A lot of people died from radiation and the effects of it, and the town of Pripyat was basically left to be deserted, only inhabited by the ghosts of the people who once lived there. And yeah, even until this day, 54 years later, no one inhabits that place. I think there's some ways you can go there and visit there, but it just needs like very special protection. But honestly, this is still uninhabitable even half a century after. And the reason I'm telling you all this is not so you'd, feel bad about it or anything. I'm telling you because it's the concept of this album. We've recently reviewed An Hour Before It's Dark by Marillion, which is their latest album. And as you might know, Steve Hillage and Steve Rothery were of course members in creating that album. And a lot of what that album talks about is the state of mankind, what we're doing to the world, what we're doing to ourselves. And it's totally reasonable seeing Steve Rothery do his own solo work on such a subject of what mankind can do when dealing with powers sometimes greater than what we can perceive and work with. And if you thought that this album was going to be a typical neo-prog, very dark, very criticizing of mankind's decisions and the way that we do things and how we've destroyed the world, well, it isn't that. It's actually something quite different. Honestly, I think this album was carelessly categorized as neo-prog because honestly listening to it would lead you to think that it's much better categorized as space rock and something different which isn't neo-prog because it's even quite far from Marillion's music. Firstly, this is an entirely instrumental album. A personally thing that I really like is when I get an instrumental album. I love it when there's stuff like this. They usually never get boring, and I say usually because I still haven't really encountered a very boring instrumental album, but those do exist. And secondly, this album really shines with hope. It's very hopeful. Everything about it is really looking forward to a better future despite criticizing the past. Now you might be asking yourself, how does it do that? It's an instrumental, there's no lyrics to pass that through, but I find that this album really makes a great point using only instruments and only the emotions and feelings that it lets off from the music. Oh, and did I mention that Steve Rothery isn't the only Steve on here? There's actually 3 Steves on here. So we have Steve Rothery, but we also have Steve Hackett from Genesis appearing on here in the first and the third tracks, which is really cool. And then we have all the 3 Steves together, joined by, of course, the last Steve, which is Steven Wilson. So I guess, you know, it's kind of cheating, but he is a Steve in many ways. And all 3 of them play the guitars on here, and honestly, they accumulate to something really good. And this holy trinity of Steves, they really do a fantastic job on here, and especially when they all appear together on the third track, Old Men of the Sea. That track in particular is my personal favorite from the album. I really like that one. I think it's a really, you know, staple track of the album, if you might say. There is quite a recurring subject on this album. Usually it goes in a way that the track starts off pretty calm, pretty quiet, it has something very basic to it, and then it just builds up upon it to the end, where it then crescendos into something really nice, and then it ends off, starting that process once more. And this third track in particular, I think it's the longest track on this album, and it really takes its time with the way that it builds up and, you know, adds emotions, adds textures, adds colors, and I really like that. And the contributions made by all 3 guitarists on here is just phenomenal. I think this track is really good, and if you don't know it, you should really go ahead and listen to it, but as a whole, you should really go ahead and listen to this album. And you know, I see a lot of people that really like certain bands but never really do get around to listening to the solo albums of the individual members of the band, and that's quite unfortunate because honestly a lot of the gems found on most like progressive albums comes from those solo albums. Those people that take what they've learned, you know, put their own emphasis on what they like and make a solo album, and it really leads to a lot of great things. I met it with Pink Floyd and their solo members, and I've met it with Marillion, as well as other really good players. And The Ghost of Pripyat is just a fantastic album. I think the thing that I really like about it is just how much it's filled with emotions, how many feelings there in it. I love the fact that they do it on here. It's a fantastic album. It isn't perfect in many ways. It still retains some of those neo-prog aspects that I personally like less, but as a whole, this is a great experience to, you know, go through. You can maybe listen to this in the background. You don't really have to focus on the music too much, as it is an instrumental album after all, but I really liked it. And another thing which I really think is cool about it is just how much versatility there comes with the guitar playing on here. It's amazing to me to think that this one instrument can create so many different things that sound completely unlike each other, and this album is really a staple of that. This cover naturally has an image of the decaying corpse of a once effervescent town of Pripyat in Ukraine. And seeing what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, it really is just very sad to see this. It's like, you know, more morbid than it probably would have been back in 2014. And hopefully for anyone watching this video in the future, by the time you see this, the situation has been resolved in some way. But honestly, at the moment, it just seems very bleak to everyone involved. And yeah, sometimes people make stupid decisions, and you know, the Chernobyl incident could be connected to some stupid decisions made by people that cost many in their lives. But sometimes we can control our decisions and make things better, and it seems like what's happening right now in Europe is really a testimony to that. So yeah, I hope the Ghost of Pripyat can try and forgive us for what we've done, but honestly I don't really see how that's possible because so many people didn't get a chance to live, and for what it's worth, it's really us doing stupid things. But hey, I'm talking about the cover. This cover is really nice. I think it like really adds up and connects well to this album. The colors on here, the imagery, the way that everything is kind of simplistic but still gets the message across is really lovely, and there is something intriguing about seeing this very ghostly like town on the cover. It really adds something to the interest of this album, and I quite like it, although I would say that this cover is understandably quite uneventful. So when it comes to the rating of this album, this one gets a well-deserved 8 out of 10. The thing I pretty much really love about this album is how well it represents neo-prog, the way that I think neo-prog should be, and not the shit that's found on most neo-prog albums nowadays. But yeah, that's about it guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Crack the Sky by Crack the Sky, their debut self-titled album. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.